everyone, my name is Adrian and I'm here to present my ground beef project in this chemistry cook-off. In terms of ground beef, the first thing you want to do, if you did freeze it, is to thaw the ground beef, meaning that you defrost it. You can do this via microwaving it or the process I'm currently doing, which is putting it in some cold water. Speaking of ground beef is a heterogeneous mixture and a mixture nonetheless. As seen through this animation I created, pizza is also a mixture. A mixture is a combination of two or more substances that are not chemically combined. For example, this pizza and the pepperoni. Pepperoni can be separated from the pizza, making it a mixture. Now that we know what mixtures are, what is a heterogeneous mixture? A heterogeneous mixture is a mixture that is not evenly mixed throughout. With that being said, the next process within cooking ground beef is to actually cut it into the right proportion. For me, I said I was going to cut it into 0.25 pounds. I didn't exactly measure it, but I just felt it and it felt like 0.25 pounds. As you can see in this video, I put it on a cutting board, got a knife, and just cut it in half. I believe each is 0.5 pounds of ground beef. Unfortunately, I did have a little struggle, but ultimately I did end up putting it on the plate. And once I was finished with one half of the ground beef, I put the other one in a new plastic bag, but for now I put it in an old one and made sure it was sealed tightly. With proportions in check now, we are able to move on to cooking. In cooking, of course, the first thing you gotta do is oil up the pan. Sometimes you'd have to preheat the pan, but in my case you just have to oil it up. I used olive oil to oil up the pan, which in hindsight probably wasn't the best idea, but it allowed me to add one more thing to this video: homogeneous mixtures. Now, what are homogeneous mixtures? An example of homogeneous mixture is sugar water. Sugar water is, well, if you add sugar to water. When you add sugar to water, the sugar, or the components, are evenly mixed and some parts become invisible, aka the sugar. Now that we got oil on the pan, we are now able to put ground beef on it. In my case, a lot of popping happened, and that is due to the oil and the water trying to combine, which doesn't end well. Speaking of the ground beef excreting water, water is actually a solvent. Since water is a solvent, what are solvents? An example of a solvent is salt water found in the ocean. Solvents are substances that dissolve other substances to form a solution. For example, water can be a solvent to salt to make salt water. Once the pops eventually die down, you're able to finally and safely press into the meat to allow them to brown, which means they're safe to eat. However, there's one thing I didn't tell you guys. Water isn't just a solvent, it is also called a pure substance. Now that we know water is a pure substance, what are pure substances? Pure substances are things with definite properties and that are made of the same elements or compounds throughout. Once we are done with browning the ground beef, meaning that we finally cooked them until they look brown, we are now able to put them on a plate and add a little bit of salt, which is also a compound. Now that we know salt is a compound, what are compounds? Compounds, for example salt, are pure substances combined chemically to form a new substance. In terms of salt, as an example, salt contains two pure substances, sodium and chlorine, making it a compound. Now that we got the ground beef ready, we are now able to get the rice. That being said, all I wanted here was 247 grams of rice to go along with the ground beef. Speaking of rice, rice is also a heterogeneous mixture, which we talked about previously in this video. Now that we got the rice and ground beef in check, all we have to do now is put them in one plate. Once we are finished, we add a little bit of sauce. In my case, mayonnaise and ketchup. Firstly, I added ketchup just to spice things up. Speaking of ketchup, ketchup is actually a colloid and a homogeneous mixture, which we talked about previously in this video. Now, what are colloids? An example of a colloid is milk. Colloids are mixtures where tiny particles of substance are evenly spread throughout, however, the particles are not dissolved. For example, fat within milk is equally spread out, however, the fat has not dissolved into the milk, meaning that it is a colloid. Now that we added the ketchup, we are now going to add mayonnaise, which is also a heterogeneous mixture. Now that we added everything we needed, now we just mix everything well and make sure everything's evenly spread throughout. And the last and final part, and my favorite part, is to grace the food and enjoy the food with all of my content, since I created something that I genuinely enjoy. Don't forget to add a little entertainment in the background so you're able to lose yourself in the food, and I thank you for listening. This is for #chemistry cookoff, and I hope you learned something. Bye, Adrian Lubao.